Everyone, welcome to LatinXcellence in Iowa. Today, you're going to find me with Alejandro Ortiz. He is a community organizer for Iowa Migrant Movement for Justice. He's out in Des Moines in his own house. Hello. That's so awesome. He's a homeowner. And he also graduated from the University of Iowa. Thank you for being with me today, Alejandro.
Thank you, Victor. Thanks for
Um,
having me.
yeah, of course. And so I guess to get started, could you give us some of your family's background? Where I know they're immigrants, so where do they come from? And when did you get to Sioux City?
Yeah, so much of my extended family, had been in and out of the U.S. for some time, well before I was born and such.
Hmm.
There was, as many families,
Hmm.
temporary work,
Hmm.
in and out, and then eventually one of my uncles discovered, the meat processing industry in the Siouxland area,
Hmm.
largely I think in South Sioux City, Nebraska, actually, and we had family, or my family, I guess. I wasn't born yet.
Hmm.
Some folks were already out here. Others were still in Mexico. But essentially, he convinced a lot of my family to come out to the Siouxland area. Most moving to South Sioux City, Nebraska. Some folks kind of settling in Sioux City again, largely to work in the food processing. So that also
Hmm.
included both my parents.
Hmm.
They moved out there, and that's where I was born and raised. So, and to this day, much of that extended family is still there. Many are still working in that industry, including my parents. But that would have been like late 80s, that when
Hmm.
like the family started to kind of migrate out here.
Yeah, it's very interesting. People follow people, right? And I think that's just very true to especially Latinx migration, especially across the Midwest. Typically, you'll see people from certain regions across Iowa, which I find very fascinating. Like in eastern Iowa, a certain area of Mexico will migrate there. In Denison, I see different migration patterns, which is an hour and a half away from Sioux City. So it's just kind of cool to even just think about that.
Mhm.
So you went to the University of Iowa. What did you study and kind of what was your path getting to that major?
That's a good question. In terms of like that path and such, I mean, I had like many, and I think it's a very common and probably a good thing, in my opinion, that you kind of you change, you grow, you have an idea of what you're interested in, and then you explore and you learn and you discover new things that not only are you maybe better at, but maybe enjoy more.
Hmm.
And even in the end of the day, sometimes that doesn't turn into exactly what you thought it would, and in many cases, or in some cases, in a very positive way. I'm a community organizer. I
Hmm.
did not study, I mean, anything that was directly,
You didn't
directly in
study
those
community
fields, right?
organizing.
Exactly. I didn't study community organizing. I didn't even study political science. I actually,
Hmm.
I entered college as a math and accounting major,
That's
actually.
right. That's right.
Yeah, I was good at the numbers and I liked the numbers. I still like numbers, but eventually I kind of discovered that wasn't what I was interested in. I stayed in the business school and kind of headed more in like the management route, and was
Hmm.
exploring like human resources and leadership, as well as more of like information systems. So like working with
Hmm.
databases and a bit of like kind of not full in-depth coding, but at least like the groundwork for being able to comfortably work with, again, databases, information systems,
Hmm.
websites, stuff like that. So which honestly that has been to this day incredibly helpful.
Hmm.
Databases, information systems, it's literally everything. From the in the nonprofit world, for instance, like everything's a database, and
Hmm.
having being comfortable with those types of tools been incredibly helpful. I also mess around a bit with graphics and like
Hmm.
website stuff, so some of that
Hmm.
was helpful there too. And honestly, learning kind of like that the business world and such, I think gave me an interesting perspective at I guess what that world is like. And I even spent some time in that world, and I think that in different ways
Hmm.
contributed to I guess the work that I'm doing now.
So I think, studying math and business, I think that gave you a lot of like analytical skills and a lot of transferable skills that you
Mhm.
were able to apply to your current career as a community organizer. And I think that's very, very important, and especially to remember as a student now in high school, like, okay, and let me start studying this, but maybe this could lead me here. I like that.
Mhm.
College is more than just a classroom, right? You move out of your home, and you meet new people. You experience different cultures
Yeah.
because typically colleges and universities are international spaces, and even intercultural, because people are different in Des Moines than they are in Denison, right?
Oh,
So I feel like from there you'll even get some interesting interaction. What advice would you give to first generation students today, or what is something you wish you would have known going into college?
yeah. I mean, I think something that's really important is to get in the habit of asking questions, like to and not even just and to thinking. Yeah, just ask questions. That's
Hmm.
like the biggest thing that has honestly like helped me out, and something that I do in my work. I mean, as a community organizer, I'm talking to folks on a regular basis, and I'm trying to express my position on things, and come to an understanding. And even if we don't specifically agree, I think that asking questions is a tactic that I use in helping folks understand. Is especially we're individuals that experience anything from microaggressions to full-on racism, and anything from you know and sometimes we don't question that kind of stuff. We kind of just become comfortable in kind of like the life that we live. I think many of us are aware of the different issues that we and barriers that we face, growing up and such. And I think the more we start asking those questions, the more that the folks that are making those decisions are going to start asking themselves those questions. And so
Hmm.
that's definitely one thing that I wish I would have started at a younger age.
Hmm.
Even in high school, even
Hmm.
in early college, rather than
Hmm.
just accepting what was just because it was.
Yeah, and I think questions almost like create a map for yourself, because you're not going to have the right question right away. You
Right.
ask the question to get deeper and have a deeper understanding of where you need to go or what you need to do, right? Or get the answer you're looking for. And I think yeah, that's a very powerful answer. Yeah, ask questions. And it's very, and I mean, I think like people are like, no question is dumb, but yeah, it's true. No question is dumb, because
It
you have to have a question to get the answer and keep growing and learning and learning. What was your experience leaving your Latinx community in Sioux City to go to Iowa? What was that transition like? Did you feel pushback or a yearning from your family to stay?
I experienced maybe a bit of that, but at that point, I think largely because my eldest sister who went to Iowa State, was doing well. My brother was also in college at the time, and
Mm,
the
so your
early say
parents were used to it, yeah,
had gotten used to it. They had built some trust in this system that they weren't familiar with, right?
yeah.
Um, but also, I mean, there was also, of course, the obstacles that we face in thinking back. Again, this is where I wish I would have started asking those questions, right? Where I'm thinking back at like my interactions with with teachers and counselors,
Counselors, yeah.
and like I had a good relationship with my counselor, but I also remember conversations where they were almost like kind of trying to keep my like ambitions a little bit lower,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
in
yeah.
some cases that can be like a there might be
Uh,
some ways to have those conversations to keep certain things realistic, but I think and maybe there was some point to those conversations, but I do think back at that time and wonder what that could have been like if I would have engaged with that conversation of like, well, why not? Why shouldn't I apply
mhm,
to this school?
yeah.
Like, why shouldn't I do this thing that maybe I'm not going to get into that school, but why not just try it, right?
Yeah, and
And
at what point do you not feel like it's a microaggression too? Moving on, I guess like I'd like to touch more on what you do currently. Could you
yeah.
kind of explain what your work as a community organizer is?
Yeah. So as a community organizer, I mean, I guess a little context about the organization that I work for. So it's two sides of what is now merging to be one movement, essentially. So
Mm-hmm.
we have Iowa Justice for Our Neighbors and a piece of AFSC, which is like the the legal services component. So we have like Iowa J Fund, Just for Our Neighbors, has different clinics across the state, and there's a national organization as well. So there are, versions of this in other states, but here in Iowa, so that's, we have lawyers, we have legal assistants, we have
Mm-hmm.
folks that are, helping immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, with whatever process they're working towards. So some of the questions right now that we're answering, that we're talking to folks about, are, things like DACA and TPS, right? So these are things that are having consistently, either under attack or potentially, on the line because of decisions that are being made, right? So, that's that component of being there and providing those direct services, but then bringing in the AFSC side of communicating with those folks and translating that into action, right? Okay, so these are the obstacles, these are the issues that you're facing. How can we translate that to advocacy? So much of
Mm-hmm.
that, for instance, this year and how I got involved was the meat processing industry, and the obstacles and the barriers, the fears that workers were facing, whether that was because of coronavirus and the barriers folks were experiencing in getting access to testing and healthcare, and from that, identifying where to move that. Because again, I don't, as an organizer, say I'm working with a specific team or workers, I'm not going to say, hey, you all need to strike. More, it's like, talk to me about what's going on, tell me what issues are, tell me what goals you have, and then let's talk through how we can get there. So we're talking to our community about what issues they're facing,
Yeah.
and then translating that into action.
And I think that I love, and honestly, through your answer, I definitely see your passion, and I think that's so important to kind of like experience as well. Like, you love the work that you do, and you have all these big questions that you want to answer through your work, and you're committed, which is so, and that's important to hear, because once you graduate college, that's kind of like the goal, right? Doing something that you really want to do, and I think that leads me to this next question. So, what does success mean to you then? What does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think success, to me, that has changed so much in my development and what I thought was success. And honestly, like what I see as success now is community. Is
Mm-hmm.
like having a community where you feel supported and where you're supporting others.
Mm-hmm.
So, how does that translate into, I guess what has been going on this year, right? It's been a tough year for our communities, for
Mm-hmm.
marginalized communities, for our immigrants and refugees here in the state,
Mm-hmm.
where, of course, there's the impacts of COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
There's the after effects of COVID-19 on employment, houselessness. We're talking
Mm-hmm.
about, some communities that were devastated by a storm that we'd never seen before, at least in our
Yeah,
lifetimes.
a hurricane. Yeah.
And exactly,
Yeah.
and folks are still recovering from that. And largely,
Yeah.
it's the marginalized communities. A lot of refugees were re-traumatized.
Mm-hmm.
They and then continue to be traumatized by the lack of response by decision
Mm-hmm.
makers. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, this help me like better understand what the dynamics are in this state of a lot of great folks in the community that want to step in, and then, but unfortunately, because that we don't fully have the capacity to respond as a community, there are a lot of still like cracks and so on,
Mm-hmm.
and the state and decision makers just haven't stepped up to that,
Yeah.
largely for you know honestly ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
They hiring practices, they don't have the folks that know how to reach these communities, and in some cases because they prioritize things over our communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, we have organizations that step in, we have leaders in the community that step in and
Mm-hmm.
do that, and I think folks that are you know probably going to watch this, and us too. I think we've been aware of that for some extent, right? I
Mm-hmm.
kind of touched on this before, where we've done the jobs of the schools a lot, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
being there to
Mm-hmm.
help out our parents understand, and to be kind of like a middle person for the
Mm-hmm.
school and our parents. And I never got my check for
Yeah.
that work,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I never will. But that's something that translates even into big like crisis response, right? And so these are the conversations that we're having and continue to have with decision makers, and so the success that I would say that I've observed is, again, the movement that is building because of that, the community that's come together, the folks, at least from what I've experienced, and definitely here in Des Moines, is like paying attention to all levels of leadership. We have our city council virtual meetings that are stacked, that folks are paying attention, and folks are then going on to Twitter and trolling and so on. And that's a form of engagement, that's a form of community, and that's a form of like even raising awareness again of like those very those issues that are that start from like the city level and then just kind of translate up. So what I think that I guess to kind of end this part is like there needs to be a culture shift that addresses those issues, and that places people who know how to address those issues and that know the communities that those issues affect to be making those decisions. I think that there are folks, in our generation and even older that are ready to do that. But also, I think we need to be proactive about making sure that we're planting those seeds early on. So, leadership development and leadership development doesn't mean, we're going to get you ready to be mayor. It just means that we develop you to be able to be, engaging with an advocate for yourself, an advocate for your community. And it really just someone that's listening, that talks and that listens, and that wants to learn from their neighbors. And we with AFSC, Iowa Migrant Movement for Justice, we do some trainings as well. And if folks want to be involved, they can reach out to me in that. But it's how do we translate these issues that we talk about on a regular basis, that we can have meetings about like, oh, these are all issues, but how do we translate that to action? I think is another component to, that community and what success is truly going to be.
And I have one final question to wrap things up. And what does being Latinx mean to you?
Yeah, and like I actually had almost like an existential crisis on Wednesday trying to think through this, and because I started to question what that meant, right? I started to really question what it meant, and how we, what am I doing? Because again, I'm going to be talking at the Indigenous Peoples Day, and I was asked like how do you want to identify yourself, and like what does that mean, or like and some folks were because are Indigenous to our communities here, are Indigenous to our lands here, are peoples of these lands, and I'm not, and I have Indigenous ancestry, of course, in Mexico and such. And then I wanted to explore that more than I had before. Like, what does that mean? What people from the lands that my parents were from, and then I just started going on a rabbit hole of like, what is like the entire history and like the erasure of Black and Indigenousness in Mexico, the U.S., America, and it really started to complicate things for me because like the history that I was finding about these lands like seemed very colonized. It seemed very like it villainized the people of the lands, and there didn't seem to me to be much accessible history of of those communities, of these tribes, of these people. And then I was in these rabbit holes of that, and then I was in these rabbit holes of even what does Latinx mean, or how should we be saying Latinx? Should we be saying Latine, or like what if we pronounce the X like the way that it is pronounced in Mexico
Latinx.
and in Latinx. And then so I was just going in these rabbit holes and really complicating things. And I think these are questions that we should be asking. We should be kind of dissecting, like what because what I don't want to do is I don't want to be in brown face. I don't want to be in blackface. I don't want to pretend that I am something that I'm not. In some spaces, I very much experience racism. I experience, you know, microaggressions. I experience all of these things. But in other spaces, while that, you know, might still be a component, I am also a white presenting person. And so that's a very complicated thing that I think that, you know, is, I think important to question. But for me, what it truly means is that, at least, you know, in the context of where we live and who we are, I mean, I think that I've been, you know, kind of just like you know, we're in a state where I think we're often forced to assimilate, right? It's like a forced assimilation culture. You know, we have English only laws. We have, you know, an Iowa nice that truly translates to "we like you if you're like us," and you know, so I guess I just feel like I'm a complicated person that has faced you know, different barriers and such, and has learned a lot and has had to be an inherent advocate. I've just, you know, that just has had to be how I've developed, and someone that, you know, has learned a lot, that has tried to help others in my communities learn, and you know, and is aware of the complexities of our culture and of our heritage and whatever even those terms mean. And you know, just someone that I guess wants to keep learning, and is proud, and at least of, I guess, you know, I mean, I'm really happy and connected with the culture that I'm familiar with, but I'm also critical of it, and critical of what that means and what that's going to translate to in the future.
Yeah, of course. And I think just like the corn, you're looking for growth. And I think that's very like your answer, because I feel like, you know, and I, you know, what I noticed in your answer too is your analytical coming through, right? And it's true. I mean, you have to like dig at these questions and these complexities within the immigration and the culture we've built here because of our previous you know, colonization. And I think it's just it's a good starting point to kind of be critical of your identity as a Latinx and as an Iowan, right? And even what, because you are bicultural, and what do you have that is best of both worlds, that is worst of both worlds, and that's a great outlook to have. You have to be critical of the place you love, because change is like the best thing for it, right?
Yeah,
to keep going,
definitely.
keep on growing. Well, thank you so much for being here with me, Alejandro. I really appreciate your time. And I know my students are going to take away so much from your wisdom. Thank you.